Welcome. I am Reverend Montclair, and this is Monday Church with Reverend Montclair. Today is, in Canada, Orange Shirt Day. This is an Indigenous-led initiative to bring awareness for those that were raised or removed to residential schools, government-controlled residential schools, those Indigenous peoples that were forcibly, in many cases, removed from their families, forced to cut their hair, to not speak their native language, nor practice their spiritual nor cultural traditions, and many times often not to see their families for years, not given leave to go visit them during the holidays. These schools have had a major negative impact on Indigenous populations. Child abuse, common practices in these residential schools. Many children actually died in the so-called care of the schoolmasters and school teachers, school enforcers. Children were forced to practice Christianity. And yes, that is ironic, isn't it? A religion based on the teachings of Jesus, which were the teachings of love, yet so much cruelty was enacted because of Christianity. It is also today, September 30th, the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation in Canada. This is, again, to bring awareness and acknowledgement of the horrors that were experienced by those that attended these residential schools for the Native peoples. Canada in 2021 found that there were over 1,000 unmarked graves of children on the properties of these residential schools. Because of that, here in the United States, our very own from New Mexico, Deb Haaland, the Secretary of the Interior of the United States government, she initiated a thorough investigation of our Native American fates, I'll say, because of the Indian schools here in the United States. The finding thus far has been over 500 children graves in over 50 schools. And also, with speaking with people that have survived this schooling and supposed re-education, and with the intention of so-called assimilation to white culture, the investigation showed horrible treatment of children, child abuse, physical, sexual, emotional, and even starvation, malnutrition, very overcrowded conditions leading to disease and sometimes death. So today is a big day in Canada, and let it reflect on us as well, because it was Canada that studied how the US was dealing with its native populations and how we treated our native populations and began these schools. So in the United States, we had over 400 residential schools that were active from 1800s, from 1819 through 1969. And it wasn't until 1975 that there was an enactment giving Native peoples the sovereignty to allow them to teach what they wanted to in their own schools. 1975. However, Canada started its schools after we did. They only had approximately 140 of these residential schools for the Native peoples, and they lasted from 1867 to 1996. Federally operated schools. In this country, the United States, the states with the most residential schools were Oklahoma, Arizona, and New Mexico. So, what happened with the people, the children that survived their years in the Indian schools, was that they were traumatized. They were brutalized. They were removed from their society and not given enough support, love, probably not at all, nor encouragement. They were taught some skills, but they were also used to have free labor and were necessary part of keeping the schools going, their labor. In the online encyclopedia, Britannica.com, I quote, "Many researchers and activists have traced the most difficult issues faced by contemporary Native communities to the abuses that occurred at the boarding schools. They note that the problems common to many reservations," and I insert here, "and Indigenous peoples living off reservations, including high rates of suicide, substance abuse, and domestic violence, are clear after effects of child abuse." So while Native populations are not the only ones to suffer child abuse, the cultural American intention of, and I quote, kill the Indian and preserve the man," did not work. That idealistic stance of assimilation, that idealistic stance of we're better than they are, that idealistic and arrogant ideology that we were the civilized ones and they were the uncivilized ones, was, as time has borne out, wrong. White colonial culture was wrong, was cruel and indifferent to different cultures, to human beings, to the souls of different others. There has been so much injustice, horrific cruelty visited upon Native cultures in all of the world because of the arrogance of one culture towards another. This culture of arrogance is often perpetuated through religion, and that Christianity has persisted today with the ignorance of its heinous crimes, not only against Indigenous people, children in general, women as well. And it is abhorrent to me and anyone, I hope, that knows the true history of the Christian church and religion. Meanwhile, we have a lot to atone for in our country, the United States, of how ignorant we are of the abuses that we have visited on others and continue to do so. So, with this title of this day, though it's much contested in many ways, the way that the National Day for Truth and Reconciliation has been practiced is that government officials get a day off, a paid day off. And that's rather ironic, many people have noted. That it was the government that caused these abuses. And it's not the native peoples per se that are receiving benefit from this national um, day for truth and reconciliation, which is only a federal holiday. So, what do we do with that? One thing is, yes, to keep raising awareness about the trauma, the intergenerational trauma that, like a set of dominoes, goes down through the generations, that it was caused unnecessarily by the colonists of both countries, of many countries. So, on this day for truth and reconciliation, I ask that you consider to dive into your own psyche and recognize, where is it that you need to be more truthful with yourself and others? And how is it, perhaps, that you may need to reconcile your actions, to repair relations because of your own ignorance, because of your own trauma? These kinds of holidays are not just for picnics, they're for introspection, they're for action, they're for atonement, and for awareness, a deep awareness that when we see the behavior, such as alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, the missing Indigenous women, where do the roots of these unhealthy and cruel behaviors come from?